What if I told you that my own parents tried to destroy my future, stole thousands of dollars in government aid, and when I fought back, they called the authorities on me? This is the true story of how a family's web of lies finally collapsed, but not before they tried to ruin my life completely. Hi everyone, I'm Emma, and I'm 22 years old. What I'm about to share with you happened over the past 4 years, but the roots of this story go back to when I was just 6 years old. If you've ever felt trapped by your family's expectations or wondered if you're being manipulated, this story might help you recognize the signs before it's too late. Before we dive in, I want to say that this story involves family dysfunction, financial abuse, and legal issues. If any of these topics are triggering for you, please take care of yourself. And if you find this story helpful, please consider subscribing. Sharing these experiences helps other people who might be going through similar situations. When I turned 6 years old, my parents gave me a birthday present I never asked for, complete responsibility for my baby brother Jake. Not help mommy with the baby, not be a good big sister. They literally handed me a newborn and said, "He's your responsibility now." My mum, Patricia, was only 19 when she had me. By the time I was 6, she'd already had 3 more kids. My dad, Robert, worked in construction when he felt like it, but somehow his paychecks always seemed to disappear into new power tools or weekends at the local sports bar with his buddies. Both my parents came from huge Catholic families where this kind of thing was apparently normal. "The eldest daughter raises the babies," my grandmother used to say. "That's how it's always been done." But looking back now, I realize that just because something's been done for generations doesn't make it right. I learned to change diapers before I learned to tie my shoes. While my friends were playing with Barbies, I was mixing formula and checking temperatures. My parents would go out on their date nights, which happened at least twice a week, while I put babies to bed and cleaned up after everyone. "Don't worry," my mum would say, applying her lipstick in the hallway mirror while I held a crying infant. "When you get married someday, you can pass this job to someone else's daughter." Even at 6 years old, something about that statement felt wrong. Why was taking care of children always a girl's job? Why was it something to be passed on rather than something parents did themselves? By the time I turned 14, my mum had given birth to 6 children total. That's when things went from bad to absolutely insane. I'll never forget the day she sat me down at our kitchen table with what she called important family business. She was pregnant again, number 7, and this time she handed me an actual written schedule. My name was listed as primary caregiver from 5:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. 17 hours a day, every single day. "You're old enough now to handle the night feedings on your own," she announced, like she was giving me a promotion at work. "We've cancelled your after-school drama club and your weekend art classes. Family comes first." My dad looked up from his recliner where he was watching sports. "This is what love looks like in our family, Em. You're so much better with the kids than we are anyway." That's when they dropped the real bombshell. They told me I'd need to get a work permit at 14 to help buy diapers and baby food because they couldn't afford extras. "This is real-world experience," my mum said, like she was doing me a favor. "Most kids your age don't get this kind of responsibility." What she didn't tell me was that she'd been collecting government assistance for childcare for the past 8 years. While I was changing diapers for free, she was receiving hundreds of dollars every month that was supposed to pay for professional childcare. Let me paint you a picture of what my average day looked like at 14 years old. 5:30 a.m. Wake up, make breakfast for 6 kids while my parents slept in. 6:30 a.m. Get everyone dressed, make lunches, walk the older kids to school while carrying the toddler. 8 a.m. Come home, clean up breakfast dishes, do laundry, start dinner prep. 3:30 p.m. Pick up kids from school, supervise homework while entertaining the babies. 5 p.m. Cook dinner for 8 people, serve everyone, clean up 7 p.m. Bath time for the little ones, bedtime stories, getting everyone settled. 9 p.m. Finally start my own homework, usually falling asleep at the kitchen table. 11:30 p.m. Last feeding for the baby. Finally get to bed. Weekend. What weekend? Saturdays were for grocery shopping with all 6 kids in tow, doing the week's laundry and deep cleaning the house. Sundays were for meal prep for the week ahead. I missed school constantly because someone was always sick or had a doctor's appointment. When teachers asked my parents about my absences, they'd say I was going through a difficult phase and making up excuses to avoid responsibility. The worst part was watching other kids my age. They complained about having to babysit their siblings for a few hours on Saturday night. They got allowances for doing basic chores. They had time for sports, friends, hobbies, things that seemed as foreign to me as space travel. Despite everything, I was determined to get good grades. I studied by flashlight under my blankets after everyone was asleep. I did homework during the baby's nap times. I was exhausted, but I knew education was my only way out. When my junior year started, I began researching colleges and scholarships. I discovered I could qualify for need-based aid because technically my family's reported income was very low. What I didn't know then was that my parents were hiding income and manipulating their tax returns. I applied to 15 different schools and 7 scholarship programs. I wrote essays about overcoming challenges and finding strength in difficult circumstances. I couldn't exactly write, "My parents made me raise my siblings while they collected welfare," so I focused on themes of resilience and family responsibility. The day my acceptance letter arrived from State University with a full academic scholarship, I thought my life was finally beginning. I was 17, and for the first time ever, I saw a future where I wasn't just a free babysitter. I was holding that letter, crying happy tears in our kitchen when my mum walked in and dropped her own bombshell. "I'm pregnant," she announced flatly, "with twins." My heart stopped. Twins. That would bring the total to 8 children under 18, and my mum was already struggling to care for the ones we had. "This is perfect timing," she continued, completely oblivious to my devastation. "You can defer college for a year to help me through the pregnancy and get the twins settled. Then maybe you can do some online classes while you watch them." "Mom, I can't defer. I'll lose the scholarship." She shrugged. "Then I guess you'll have to figure something else out. Family comes first, Emma. You know that." That night, I called the scholarship office. The advisor was sympathetic but firm. The scholarship was for immediate enrollment. If I deferred, it would go to someone else. I had a choice to make: take the scholarship and abandon my siblings, or stay and watch my future disappear. For 3 weeks, I agonized over this decision. I loved my siblings. They weren't the problem. The problem was a system that demanded I sacrifice my entire life for children I hadn't chosen to have. I started researching options. Could I take the kids with me somehow? Could I arrange for them to visit me at college? Could I find a way to care for them and get my education? Every scenario I explored hit the same wall: my parents' refusal to cooperate with anything that didn't center around their convenience. Finally, I made my decision. I was going to college. I spent the summer secretly preparing. I opened a bank account my parents didn't know about. I started hiding money from my part-time job at a local grocery store. I researched student housing and meal plans and everything I'd need to live independently. My younger sister Rachel, who was 15 at the time, figured out what I was planning. I was terrified she'd tell our parents, but instead she surprised me. "I've been waiting for someone to be brave enough to leave," she whispered one night as we folded laundry together. "I want to help you." Rachel had been watching our family dynamic with increasing disgust. She was old enough to understand that what was happening to me wasn't normal, and she was terrified of becoming the next primary caregiver when I left. "If you go to college and show that it's possible to leave, maybe I can follow you," she said. "Maybe we can break this cycle." Rachel became my secret ally. She helped me hide documents, covered for me when I had to miss family obligations to handle college paperwork, and most importantly, she started documenting our parents' behavior. Rachel was smarter than any of us realized. While I was focused on planning my escape, she was building a case. She started keeping a detailed diary of daily life in our house. Who did what chores, who watched which kids, how many hours per day I was responsible for childcare. She tracked our parents' work schedules and cross-referenced them with when I was expected to be home. She also started recording conversations on her phone. Not secret recordings. She'd openly have her phone out, and our parents were so used to kids being on their phones that they didn't think twice about it. "I want evidence," she told me one day. "Evidence that this isn't normal. Evidence that they're lying about stuff. Evidence that we're not crazy." Her instincts were absolutely right. 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, disaster struck. The baby got extremely sick with what turned out to be pneumonia. He was hospitalized for 4 days, and I spent every moment at the hospital because my mum couldn't handle the stress. During those 4 days, I missed 3 critical deadlines for college enrollment, financial aid paperwork, dorm assignments, and course registration. When I tried to explain the situation to the university, they were sympathetic but inflexible. "We understand family emergencies," the advisor said over the phone, "but we had thousands of students competing for these spots. When someone can't meet the deadlines, their spot goes to someone who can." Just like that, my scholarship was gone. I hung up the phone and broke down crying in the hospital parking lot. 4 years of perfect grades, extracurricular activities, and dreaming about my future. All destroyed because I'd had to be at the hospital with my sick brother while my own mother played the victim. When I got home that night, my parents were waiting for me in the living room. "We heard about the college thing," my dad said, not looking particularly upset. "Probably for the best. You're needed here." My mum nodded in agreement. "Everything happens for a reason, sweetie. This is just God's way of telling you where you belong." Losing that scholarship was devastating, but it also lit a fire under me. I realized that my parents would sabotage every opportunity I had if I didn't get completely away from them. Rachel and I started planning more seriously. We researched community colleges that I could attend while working. We looked into apartments I could afford on a grocery store salary. We investigated what legal rights I had as an 18-year-old. What we discovered was eye-opening. I had the right to leave home at 18 without my parents' permission. They couldn't legally force me to provide childcare, and if they tried to prevent me from leaving or accessing my own money, there were legal protections in place. We also discovered something else. What my parents were doing might be illegal. Rachel had found documentation that my mum was receiving government assistance for childcare, but she was claiming this money while I was providing the care for free. That's called welfare fraud, and it's a felony. "Emma," Rachel said one night, showing me printed pages she'd found in my mum's desk, "I think they've been stealing." The documents showed that for the past 8 years, my mother had been receiving approximately $400 per month in childcare assistance. She claimed she needed this money to pay for professional childcare while she worked her part-time job at a dental office. But I was the one providing the childcare, for free, for 8 years. We did the math. $400 a month for 8 years was $400. $38,000 that was supposed to pay someone to do exactly what I'd been doing for free. Armed with this information, I decided to confront my parents directly. I was 18 now, legally an adult, and I had evidence of what looked like serious criminal behavior. I chose a Sunday evening when all the kids were in bed and my parents were relaxing in the living room. I sat down across from them with a folder of documents Rachel and I had compiled. "We need to talk about my future," I started. "If this is about college again," my dad interrupted, "we've been through this. You have responsibilities here." "What about your responsibilities?" I asked, placing the first document on the coffee table. "Like this childcare assistance you've been collecting for the past 8 years. My mom's face went white. My dad leaned forward to look at the paper. "Where did you get that?" my mom demanded. "Does it matter where I got it? What matters is that you've been taking government money meant to pay for childcare while forcing me to provide that childcare for free." "That's not how it works," my dad said, but his voice was uncertain. Actually, it is exactly how it works. This is called welfare fraud, and it's a felony. The room went dead silent. "You're misunderstanding the situation," my mum finally said. "That money goes to household expenses. It's not like we're stealing it." The application specifically states that it's reimbursement for paid childcare services. You signed documents saying you were paying for professional childcare, but I was doing it for free. I placed more documents on the table, tax returns showing that they'd been claiming me as a dependent while simultaneously requiring me to work and contribute financially to the household. Records showing they'd been receiving child tax credits for a child who was functioning as an unpaid employee. "This stops now," I said. "I'm enrolling in community college and I'm moving out. You can figure out how to take care of your own children." That's when things got ugly. My father exploded. He started screaming about ungrateful children and family betrayal. My mother cried and accused me of trying to destroy the family. They threatened to cut me off completely, to tell the entire extended family that I was selfish and heartless. But the thing that scared me most was what my dad said as I was leaving the room. "If you try to leave this family, Emma, you'll regret it. We'll make sure of that." 3 days later, I came home from work to find my key didn't work. The locks had been changed. My clothes were in garbage bags on the front lawn, along with a restraining order taped to the front door. According to the paperwork, I had threatened and intimidated my parents and younger siblings. I was banned from coming within 500 feet of the family home. I stood in the yard holding this restraining order, completely stunned. How had they managed to get a legal document based on lies? How was this even possible? Rachel appeared at her bedroom window and held up her phone, mouthing, "I'm recording." But what good would that do when my own parents had convinced a judge that I was dangerous? I called a friend from high school whose family let me sleep on their couch that night. The next day, I tried to understand what had happened. It turns out that my parents had gone to court with a carefully constructed story. They claimed I had been physically aggressive with the younger children. They said I had threatened to destroy the family if I didn't get my way. They produced fake documentation from a family counselor claiming I had behavioral issues and anger management problems. The family counselor, I learned, was a friend of my mother's from high school who had a practice across town. She had never met me, but she'd written up a psychological evaluation based on interviews with family members, claiming I showed signs of severe behavioral disorders. The restraining order was temporary, pending a full hearing, but it effectively made me homeless and cut me off from my siblings. I spent the next 2 weeks sleeping in my car and picking up extra shifts at the grocery store. I was trying to save money for an apartment deposit while also paying for a lawyer to fight the restraining order. But finding a lawyer turned out to be nearly impossible on my budget. Legal aid said I didn't qualify because technically I wasn't the victim. I was the person being accused of threatening behavior. The family court hearing was scheduled for the following month. My parents had my Uncle Mark representing them. He was a lawyer who specialized in family law and owed my dad money from a failed business deal. I would be representing myself against experienced legal counsel, with no money, no stable housing, and no way to prove my innocence. That's when I got a phone call that changed everything. "Is this Emma Rodriguez?" The voice on the phone was professional, female, unfamiliar. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Jessica Martinez from the Department of Social Services. I've been assigned to investigate a case involving your family." My heart started pounding. Had my parents called social services on me too? Were they trying to claim I was somehow a danger to the community? "What kind of investigation?" I asked. "I received an anonymous tip about potential welfare fraud and child neglect in your household. I need to ask you some questions." I almost laughed with relief. Someone else had figured out what my parents were doing. Maybe it was a neighbor who'd noticed how much childcare I was providing. Maybe it was someone from school who'd put the pieces together. It wasn't until much later that I learned the truth. Rachel had called social services herself. My 15-year-old sister had been brave enough to do what I couldn't. She'd called the fraud hotline and reported our parents for welfare abuse. She'd provided specific dates, dollar amounts, and detailed documentation of the care arrangement. "Can you meet with me this afternoon?" Jessica asked. "I'd like to hear your side of the story." I met Jessica at a coffee shop downtown. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. She had a folder full of documents and a lot of questions. "Before we start," she said, "I want you to know that this conversation is confidential and you're not in any legal trouble. I'm trying to understand the family dynamics in your household." For the next 2 hours, I told her everything. The childcare responsibilities, the missed school, the lost scholarship, the welfare fraud, the restraining order, all of it. Jessica took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions. She seemed particularly interested in the documentation Rachel and I had compiled. "Do you still have copies of these financial documents?" she asked. I nodded. Rachel had made copies of everything and hidden them in her school locker before our parents kicked me out. "What about the recordings your sister made?" "She has them on her phone, but I don't know if she can access them without our parents finding out." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "I'm going to need to speak with your sister, but I'll do it at school so your parents don't know immediately. Can you contact her and let her know I'll be reaching out?" That evening, I managed to text Rachel from a friend's phone. Her response was immediate. "Finally! I've been waiting for someone official to care about this." Over the next week, Jessica conducted a thorough investigation. She interviewed Rachel at school, reviewed financial records, and spoke with teachers who had noticed my frequent absences and exhaustion. She also did something I hadn't thought of. She talked to my former co-workers at the grocery store. My manager, Mrs. Chen, had always been kind to me, but I'd never told her details about my home life. Apparently, she'd noticed more than I realized. "Emma was always exhausted," Mrs. Chen told Jessica. "She'd fall asleep during her breaks sometimes. She always smelled like baby formula and diapers." When other kids her age were talking about movies and friends, Emma talked about which kind of formula was on sale and whether generic diapers worked as well as name brand. Mrs. Chen had also noticed that I always worked the maximum hours allowed for a minor, and that I never seemed to have spending money despite working constantly. "I asked her once if she was saving for college," Mrs. Chen reported, and she started crying. She said her parents told her college was selfish and that good daughters don't abandon their families. Jessica also investigated the fake counseling reports my parents had submitted to get the restraining order. It took her exactly one phone call to determine that the counselor had never met me and had based her evaluation entirely on my parents' claims. But the most damaging evidence came from the welfare office itself. Jessica's investigation revealed that my parents had been even more fraudulent than Rachel and I realized. Not only had my mother been collecting childcare assistance for 8 years while I provided free care, but she'd also been lying about her work schedule to increase the amount of assistance she received. She'd claimed she worked 30 hours per week and needed full-time childcare coverage. In reality, she worked about 15 hours per week at the dental office, and even those hours were flexible since she was just doing basic filing and appointment scheduling. Meanwhile, my father had been claiming me as a dependent on his taxes to get child tax credits, while simultaneously forcing me to work and contribute my earnings to household expenses. He'd also been underreporting his construction income by taking payments in cash when possible. The total amount of fraud was staggering, over $45,000 in improperly claimed benefits over 8 years. But Jessica found something even more troubling. My parents had been planning to continue this fraud indefinitely by transferring the primary caregiver role to Rachel when I turned 18. In my mother's desk, Jessica found a draft application for increased childcare assistance that would have kicked in as soon as I left home. She was planning to claim that she now needed professional full-time care for 7 children, when the plan was actually to make Rachel take over all my responsibilities. This wasn't just fraud, Jessica explained to me during one of our meetings. This was systematic exploitation with a long-term plan to continue exploiting your siblings. Armed with Jessica's investigation, I finally had the ammunition I needed to fight back. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I walked into that courtroom with Jessica beside me, carrying boxes of evidence that told the real story. My parents were there with Uncle Mark, looking confident. They'd probably assumed I'd be representing myself with no evidence and no credibility. Their confidence evaporated pretty quickly. Jessica was allowed to present her findings as an expert witness. She methodically laid out the evidence: the welfare fraud, the tax fraud, the fake counseling reports, the pattern of child exploitation. She also brought Rachel to testify. My 15-year-old sister stood up in that courtroom and told the truth about our family dynamic, backed up by months of careful documentation. Emma didn't threaten anyone, Rachel said clearly. She told our parents she was going to college, and they got mad because they wanted her to keep raising their kids for free while they collected government money. The judge reviewed the fake counseling reports and immediately saw through them. The counsellor hadn't even used the correct legal terminology or standard evaluation procedures. Uncle Mark tried to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, that the welfare fraud was just paperwork errors, but the evidence was overwhelming. The restraining order was dismissed immediately. More importantly, the judge ordered that all evidence of potential criminal fraud be forwarded to the district attorney's office. My parents were going to face criminal charges. Within 2 weeks of the family court hearing, my parents were formally charged with welfare fraud, tax evasion, and child endangerment. The child endangerment charges were based on the finding that they'd been systematically exploiting me since I was 6 years old, which constituted a form of abuse under state law. Uncle Mark immediately withdrew as their lawyer, citing conflict of interest. In reality, he probably didn't want his own reputation associated with such a clear-cut case of fraud. My parents had to hire a criminal defense attorney with money they didn't have. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were now facing the same kind of financial stress they'd put me through my entire childhood. The criminal case moved slowly, but the civil consequences were immediate. The welfare office demanded immediate repayment of all fraudulent benefits, plus penalties and interest. The total was over $65,000. The IRS launched their own investigation into the tax fraud, which could result in additional penalties and criminal charges. Most importantly for my siblings, social services began monitoring the household to ensure the children were being properly cared for. While my parents dealt with their legal problems, I finally got to start building the life I'd always wanted. I enrolled in community college for the spring semester, just 4 months later than I'd originally planned. I found a small apartment that I could afford on my grocery store salary, supplemented by financial aid. For the first time in my life, I lived alone. I could study whenever I wanted. I could eat meals without having to cook for 8 people first. I could sleep through the night without being woken up by crying babies. The silence was almost overwhelming at first. I'd lived with constant noise and chaos for so long that the peace felt strange. But I adapted quickly. I threw myself into my classes and discovered I was actually a strong student when I wasn't constantly exhausted and distracted. I also started going to therapy. The college counseling center had sliding scale fees, and I qualified for almost free sessions. Working with a therapist helped me understand that what had happened to me had a name: parentification. It's a form of emotional abuse where parents force children to take on adult responsibilities inappropriate for their age. What you experienced wasn't normal, my therapist, Dr. Kim, told me during one of our early sessions. Children shouldn't be responsible for raising other children. The fact that your parents framed it as tradition doesn't make it acceptable. Dr. Kim also helped me work through the guilt I felt about leaving my siblings. I loved them, and I worried about what would happen to them without me there. One of the hardest parts of my new life was figuring out how to maintain relationships with my siblings while staying away from my parents. Rachel and I texted constantly. She kept me updated on how everyone was doing and what was happening with the legal cases. The other kids were struggling. They didn't understand why I'd suddenly disappeared from their lives. My parents had told them I'd abandoned the family and that I didn't love them anymore. Breaking that brainwashing was heartbreaking but necessary. I started by sending letters to the kids through Rachel. I explained in age-appropriate language that I hadn't abandoned them, but that I needed to live independently as an adult. I sent care packages with their favorite snacks and little toys. I remembered their birthdays and school events, even if I couldn't attend in person. Slowly, the younger kids started to understand that I still loved them, even if I couldn't live with them anymore. News of the criminal charges spread through our extended family quickly, and the reactions were mixed. Some relatives were horrified to learn what my parents had been doing. They apologized for not intervening earlier and offered to help me however they could. Others doubled down on defending my parents. They insisted this was all a misunderstanding, that I was an ungrateful daughter who'd destroyed the family over minor disagreements. My grandmother, the matriarch who'd always preached about eldest daughter's responsibilities, initially blamed me for everything. But when the full extent of the financial fraud became public, even she had to acknowledge that my parents had crossed a line. Tradition doesn't include stealing from the government, she admitted during one tense family gathering that I attended with Jessica as moral support. The family ultimately split into two camps, those who supported me and recognized the abuse, and those who believed I'd betrayed sacred family values. It was painful to lose relationships with relatives I'd grown up loving, but I realized that anyone who thought child exploitation was acceptable wasn't someone I wanted in my life anyway. My parents' criminal trial took place 8 months after their arrest. They'd attempted to plead not guilty initially, but the evidence was so overwhelming that their lawyer eventually advised them to accept a plea deal. They pled guilty to welfare fraud and tax evasion in exchange for a reduced sentence and the dropping of the child endangerment charges. The plea hearing was surreal. I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched my parents stand before a judge and admit to crimes that had funded their lifestyle for nearly a decade. My mother cried throughout the proceeding, but they weren't tears of remorse. She was crying because she was finally facing consequences for her actions. My father looked angry and defeated. He kept glancing back at me like this was somehow my fault, like I'd forced him to commit fraud by wanting to go to college. The judge sentenced them each to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. They were also ordered to pay full restitution to the welfare office and the IRS, plus penalties and court costs. The total amount they owed was over $80,000, money they didn't have. With my parents facing prison time, the question of what would happen to my siblings became urgent. Social services approached me about taking guardianship of the younger children. It was a complicated decision that I agonized over for weeks. On one hand, I loved my siblings and wanted to protect them from the foster care system. On the other hand, I was 20 years old, in college, working a minimum wage job, and still healing from years of parentification. Taking guardianship would mean voluntarily returning to the caretaker role I'd fought so hard to escape. After many conversations with Jessica, Dr. Kim, and Rachel, I came to a difficult decision. I agreed to take temporary guardianship of my siblings, but only under specific conditions. I would receive financial assistance from the state to help with housing and childcare costs. The children would all receive counseling to help them process the trauma of their parents' actions. Rachel would be considered a co-guardian, sharing responsibilities rather than dumping everything on me. I would be allowed to continue my education with support for childcare when needed. This arrangement would be re-evaluated regularly to ensure it was working for everyone. Taking guardianship of 6 kids while trying to finish college was incredibly challenging, but it was different from before in crucial ways. This time, I had chosen the responsibility. I had support systems in place, I had legal protections and financial assistance. Most importantly, I had Rachel as a true partner, rather than being expected to handle everything alone. We found a 3-bedroom house in a good school district that we could afford with the guardianship assistance payments. Rachel and I shared 1 bedroom, the 3 youngest kids shared another, and the older boys shared the 3rd. It wasn't ideal, but it was ours. We established new family rules based on age-appropriate responsibilities. The older kids helped with dishes and laundry, but they weren't responsible for raising the younger ones. Everyone did homework before screen time. We had family dinners where everyone got to talk about their day. Most importantly, we broke the cycle of parentification. Rachel wasn't expected to sacrifice her future for the family. The kids weren't given inappropriate responsibilities. When Rachel graduated high school, she went to college with our full support. It took years for all of us to fully understand and process what had happened in our family. The younger kids struggled with feeling abandoned by our parents. They had a hard time understanding why Mom and Dad were in time out, how we initially explained prison to the youngest ones. The older kids felt guilty for not protecting me when they were younger, even though they'd been children themselves, with no power to change the situation. Rachel dealt with her own trauma around feeling like she'd betrayed our parents by reporting them, even though she knew she'd done the right thing. I worked through years of conditioning that told me my worth was tied to how much I sacrificed for others. We all went to both individual and family therapy. It was expensive, but Jessica helped us access programs for children from abusive situations. Slowly, we learned to function as a healthy family unit instead of an exploitative hierarchy. Despite the challenges of raising 6 kids while going to school, I managed to maintain good grades in community college. My professors were understanding about my unusual circumstances, and several went out of their way to accommodate my schedule. I finished my associate degree in 3 years instead of 2, but I finished it. More importantly, I was accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship for transfer students from difficult backgrounds. Rachel graduated high school with honors and received a full scholarship to a nearby college. She chose to study social work, inspired by Jessica's example and wanting to help other kids in exploitative family situations. The younger kids all caught up academically once they were in a stable environment with consistent support. Their grades improved dramatically when they weren't constantly worried about family chaos. My parents were released from prison after serving 16 months of their 18-month sentences. They'd been model prisoners and earned early release for good behavior. I'd been dreading their release, wondering if they would try to regain custody of the kids or continue to cause problems for our family. Their first move was to request visitation rights with their children. By this time, I'd saved enough money to hire a family law attorney. We fought the visitation request, arguing that my parents had shown no evidence of rehabilitation or acknowledgement of the harm they'd caused. The court ordered supervised visitation only, and only with children who expressed a desire to see their parents. Of my 6 siblings, only 2 chose to have contact with our parents initially. The others were either too young to understand or too angry about being abandoned. The supervised visits were awkward and tense. Our parents kept trying to convince the kids that I had turned them against their family and that everything that had happened was my fault. After a few months, even the 2 kids who'd wanted to see them asked to stop the visits. They found the guilt trips and manipulation too stressful. The financial consequences of my parents' fraud followed them for years. They couldn't find stable housing because their criminal records made it difficult to pass background checks. They struggled to find employment for the same reason. The restitution payments they owed meant that any significant income would be garnished by the court. They were trapped in a cycle of low-wage, cash-only jobs that kept them financially unstable. My father's construction skills were still valuable, but many contractors wouldn't hire someone with a fraud conviction. My mother's part-time work at the dental office had ended when her charges became public. I felt conflicted about their struggles. I didn't want them to suffer unnecessarily, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that they'd caused their own problems through years of deliberate criminal behavior. More importantly, they never showed genuine remorse for what they'd put me through. They continued to frame themselves as the victims of an ungrateful daughter who'd chosen strangers over family. One of the most important aspects of building our new family was consciously breaking the patterns that had been passed down for generations. I researched the history of parentification in large families and learned that both my parents had experienced similar exploitation as children. The difference was that they'd internalized the abuse and perpetuated it rather than recognizing it as wrong. My grandmother had raised 12 children, mostly by forcing the older daughters to care for the younger ones. She genuinely believed this was not only normal, but character building. My mother had been the second oldest daughter in that family, which meant she'd spent her own childhood and teenage years caring for younger siblings instead of developing her own identity and interests. Understanding this history helped me feel compassion for my parents while still holding them accountable for their choices. They'd been victims once too, but that didn't excuse them turning me into a victim. Rachel and I made a commitment that this pattern would end with us. If any of our siblings had children someday, those children would be free to be children. No 6-year-old would be handed a baby and told it was their responsibility. I graduated from State University with a degree in social work, inspired by Jessica's example and wanting to help other kids in exploitative situations. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd ended up in a helping profession despite swearing I was done taking care of people. But this was different. I was choosing to help people professionally, with training and boundaries and compensation, rather than being forced into unpaid labor. My first job was with the Department of Social Services, working specifically with cases involving parentification and child labor exploitation. I discovered that my story wasn't unique. There are thousands of children, mostly girls, who are forced into inappropriate caretaking roles by parents who prioritize their own convenience over their children's development. My lived experience, combined with my professional training, made me effective at recognizing these situations and helping families develop healthier dynamics. As I became more established in my career, I started speaking publicly about parentification and financial exploitation within families. I testified before state legislators about strengthening protections for children who are forced into adult roles. I advocated for better oversight of welfare programs to prevent the kind of fraud my parents committed. I also started a blog and social media presence to raise awareness about these issues. Many people don't realize that parentification is a form of abuse, or that it's possible for parents to financially exploit their children in legal ways. The response to my advocacy was overwhelmingly positive. I heard from hundreds of people who'd experienced similar situations and felt validated that their experiences had a name and weren't their fault. I also heard from some people who defended parentification as teaching responsibility or building character. These responses reminded me how deeply embedded these attitudes are in certain communities. Today, Rachel and I are both college graduates with stable careers. She became a social worker like me, and we often collaborate on cases involving family dysfunction. 5 of my 6 siblings have graduated high school and are pursuing their own paths. 2 are in college, 1 joined the military, 1 is in trade school, and 1 is taking a gap year to figure out their direction. The youngest is now in middle school and thriving academically. He has no memory of our parents' household chaos and has grown up in a stable, supportive environment. All of my siblings are in therapy and have been since we gained custody. They're processing their trauma and learning healthy relationship patterns that were never modeled for them by our parents. I'm in a long-term relationship with someone who understands and respects my history. He's never once suggested that I should forgive and forget or repair the relationship with my parents. Despite all our success, we still face ongoing challenges related to our family history. Some family members continue to blame me for destroying the family. They invite our parents to gatherings but exclude me and my siblings who live with me. The kids sometimes struggle with feeling different from their peers who have normal families. They have to explain why their older sister is their guardian instead of their parents. I still struggle sometimes with guilt about not being able to save my parents or help them become better people. Therapy has helped me understand that I can't control other people's choices, but it's still difficult. Rachel and I both deal with hypervigilance around responsibility and caretaking. We have to consciously work to maintain healthy boundaries and not fall back into over-functioning patterns. If I could go back and talk to my 14-year-old self, here's what I would tell her. What's happening to you isn't normal, and it isn't your fault. Family tradition doesn't override basic human rights. You deserve to have your own dreams and pursue your own future. Asking for help isn't betraying your family, it's protecting yourself and your siblings. You can love someone and still refuse to be exploited by them. Breaking generational patterns is hard but necessary work. You're stronger than you know, and you will survive this. My story is ultimately about more than just one dysfunctional family. It's about systems that allow child exploitation to continue generation after generation. It's about welfare systems that don't have adequate oversight to prevent fraud. It's about cultural attitudes that prioritize family loyalty over individual rights and children's welfare. It's about the way poverty and lack of education can trap people in cycles of poor decision-making. But it's also about resilience and the possibility of change. It's about how one person's courage to speak up can protect not just themselves, but also their siblings and future generations. It's about how systems can work when good people like Jessica are willing to do thorough investigations and fight for justice. It's about how therapy and education can break cycles that have persisted for generations. Today, as I'm recording this video, it's been 6 years since I first confronted my parents about the welfare fraud. It's been 4 years since they were released from prison. My siblings and I have built a life that would have seemed impossible when I was 14 and changing diapers at 5:30 in the morning. We're not perfect, we still have hard days and ongoing challenges, but we've broken the cycle. None of my siblings will be forced to sacrifice their childhood to raise other people's children. None of them will have their dreams dismissed as selfish. None of them will have to choose between family loyalty and personal freedom. That's the real victory in all of this. If you're watching this video and recognizing patterns from your own life, please know that you're not alone. There are resources and people who can help you. You deserve to have your own life and pursue your own dreams. If you're a mandated reporter, teacher, doctor, social worker, please pay attention to kids who seem to have inappropriate responsibilities for their age. Sometimes the most responsible, helpful children are the ones who most need your help. And if you're a parent watching this, please consider whether you're asking your children to take on responsibilities that should be yours. It's never too late to change course and let your kids be kids. Thank you for watching, and please remember, breaking free is always possible, even when it seems impossible.